December 1386, King Charles VI of France and his wife watched a duel. The combatants were Jean de Carouge and Jacques le Grie. Once friends, they were now bitter enemies. Carouges had accused le Grie of raping his wife, Marguerite, which le Grie denied. To let God decide who was lying, the king permitted them to settle the dispute through a judicial duel. Chapter 1, The Truth According to Carouges. The scene shifts back to 1370, with the English army laying siege to Limoges, under orders from their lord, Count Pierre of Alençon. Carouges and his men were to defend a bridge, to provoke the French army. The English began slaughtering civilians. Unable to bear it any longer, Carouges, against his father's advice, charged forward shouting, "Long live the king!" During the battle, Carouges fought bravely and saved le Grie's life from the English. Despite their efforts, the French ultimately lost Limoges, and Count Pierre ordered the troops to return home. After announcing the retreat, Carouges was thanked by le Grie for saving his life, and the two became close friends. In 1377, Count Pierre summoned his vassals to his castle in Bellancombe to swear fealty. Carouges' father, a commander in the count's army, owned the castle. Traditionally, Carouges would inherit his father's position after his death. However, it was clear that the count admired le Grie but disliked Carouges. Sometime later, le Grie visited Carouges. After being warmly received, le Grie revealed his true purpose, to collect taxes for the count to support military defenses. Carouges' expression darkened upon hearing this. Due to the plague, his rental income was very low, and he struggled to maintain daily operations, let alone pay taxes. After much argument, le Grie agreed to plead with the count on Carouges' behalf, allowing him to pay less. Facing bankruptcy, Carouges decided to return to war. Le Grie opposed Carouges' decision, pointing out that Carouges had no heirs and if he died, all his property would go to the count. Carouges explained that he was already bankrupt, and war was the only way to earn money. 1380, Carouges fights in Normandy. After a victorious battle against the English, Carouges and his troops stationed themselves in the territory of Robert de Beaumais. Carouges was disgusted by the name Beaumais, as the family had sided with the English in previous battles. Even though they now swore loyalty to the French king, their treachery could not be erased. Due to his animosity, Carouges refused to shake Robert's hand. However, Robert's daughter, Marguerite, caught Carouges' eye. Seeing the mutual attraction between his daughter and Carouges, Robert saw an opportunity. The Beaumais family was in a dire situation due to their tarnished reputation. Marguerite's marriage to Carouges could help restore their standing in France. After negotiations, Carouges agreed to marry Marguerite, with a large dowry of land and wealth. Thus, Carouges gained a beautiful wife and escaped bankruptcy. Soon after, le Grie visited Carouges. To Carouges' displeasure, the estate of Neuville, which should have been part of Marguerite's dowry, had been taken by Count Pierre and given to le Grie. Le Grie explained that he had been managing the count's finances and the estate was a reward from the count. Le Grie had not requested it. Although Carouges said nothing, a rift had formed between the friends. When discussing the estate with his wife, Marguerite was indifferent, as the estate could help pay off her father's debts, but Carouges was unwilling to let it go. He believed that his service to the king warranted a fair judgment. However, as Count Pierre was a relative of the king, Carouges' appeal was quickly dismissed. To make matters worse, Carouges received news of his father's death on his way back. Seeing his mother in tears, Carouges learned that the count had appointed le Grie as the army commander to retaliate for his appeal. Carouges could no longer inherit his father's position, and the castle of Bellancombe would be confiscated. Furious, Carouges decided to confront the count. At that time, the count was hosting a ceremony to install le Grie as commander. When Carouges met the count, he protested le Grie's appointment. His vehement words left a poor impression on the count. 1 year later, Carouges' friend Crespin had his first son and invited Carouges and his wife to his home. Marguerite was excited upon receiving the invitation, seeing it as an opportunity to reintegrate into noble society. At his wife's urging, Carouges decided to attend the banquet. The couple soon arrived at their friend's home. Carouges and le Grie met again. Despite their past conflicts, Carouges extended a hand of friendship after shaking hands. To show goodwill, Carouges asked his wife to kiss le Grie, but this kiss disturbed le Grie deeply. Soon after, Carouges prepared to leave for battle in Scotland. Before departing, he shared a tender farewell with his wife. During the ensuing battles in Scotland, Carouges fought valiantly. The Scottish campaign cost the French dearly, but Carouges survived. After returning home, Carouges' wife joyfully embraced him, but he looked exhausted and sad. The next day, Carouges personally reported the battle situation to the count, and then went to Paris to collect the overdue military pay. A few days later, upon returning home, Carouges received shocking news. Marguerite had been raped by le Grie. Marguerite explained that one day, while Carouges' mother took all the servants out, leaving her alone at home, le Grie suddenly visited. He had his servant find an excuse to trick Marguerite into opening the door, then barged in and assaulted her. With tears in her eyes, Marguerite pleaded with her husband to seek justice for her, and Carouges agreed. Carouges quickly gathered his friends. According to the rules, Carouges had to appeal to Count Pierre, but knowing the Count would protect Legris, Carouges planned to spread the news widely, ensuring everyone knew about Legris's crime. This was only part of Carouges's plan. He knew the Count would side with Legris even in a public trial. Carouges then personally went to the king, requesting a duel to the death with Legris. For years, King Charles VI had deemed duels illegal and had not approved any since his ascension. However, with unanimous consent from the parliament, Carouges could still engage in a judicial duel with Legris. In medieval Europe, this was a crucial way to resolve judicial disputes when both sides had no witnesses. Ministers reminded Carouges that if he lost, his wife would be burned at the stake for false accusations. Carouges, believing in divine favor, insisted on the duel. The king eventually approved his request. 6 months later, the king summoned the ministers to judge the case, ending Carouges's account. The scene shifts back to 1370 in Limoges. Facing the English soldiers brutally killing civilians, Carouges decided to attack. Legris advised that attacking would cause the English to capture Limoges, but Carouges replied, "Let it be as they wish," and charged at the enemy. To avoid letting Carouges fight alone, Legris shouted "Long live the king," and led the men to attack. Legris emphasized that he had saved Carouges's life during the battle, though Carouges hadn't noticed, because Carouges disobeyed orders and attacked. Count Pierre held him mainly responsible for the loss of Limoges, already disliking Carouges for his bad temper and dull personality. The Count now had an even worse impression of him. However, Legris always spoke up for his friend, earning the Count's recognition for his character. Unlike Carouges, Legris had humble origins. He had joined the church in his youth but left, disliking the strict life, to venture into the secular world. Legris was literate, spoke Latin, and excelled at dealing with people, gaining the Count's trust. Additionally, both Legris and the Count were notorious in their love lives, bonding them as friends. Knowing Legris could do arithmetic, the Count entrusted him with managing his finances. Legris excelled, restoring the Count's fiscal operations and collecting taxes. To intimidate noble debtors, Legris used violence, demanding Robert surrender the estate of Anouville to repay debts. Though Robert resisted, claiming it was his daughter Marguerite's dowry and worth twice the debt, he eventually conceded under pressure. While hunting, the Count informed Legris that Robert had married his daughter to Carouges. Shocked, Legris couldn't fathom a cultured noblewoman marrying an illiterate brute. Carouges later filed charges against Legris and the Count, but the Count was unconcerned, knowing Carouges posed no real threat. In retaliation, the Count appointed Legris as the army commander, stripping Carouges of his chance to inherit his father's position. At the installation ceremony, Carouges violently protested, yelling at the Count's unfairness and insulting Legris, making a fool of himself in everyone's eyes. Carouges and Legris met again, with Legris extending a friendly gesture, suggesting there should be no rift between the king's subjects. Since Carouges rarely traveled with his wife, many nobles, including Legris, met Marguerite for the first time. Their mutual kiss exchanged ambiguous glances. At the banquet, Legris initiated conversation with Marguerite. Finding many common topics, Legris believed Marguerite was becoming enamored with him, and though he denied it, he had fallen for the noblewoman and assumed she reciprocated. In 1386, Carouges returned from the Scottish campaign and reported to the Count. During this time, Legris attempted to reconcile with his old friend, but Carouges flew into a rage, unable to tolerate Legris addressing him by name after becoming a knight, and berated him. Legris remained calm, further humiliating Carouges. Soon after, with Carouges in Paris, Legris and his servant Adam visited Marguerite's home. Adam, pretending his horse needed a new horseshoe, asked to warm up inside, though Marguerite wanted to refuse. Being alone and forbidden to meet men in her husband's absence, she allowed them in. Seeing Adam's urgent need for help, Marguerite reluctantly softened. However, as soon as Marguerite opened the door, Legris suddenly barged in. He shouted at Adam to wait outside while frantically declaring his love for Marguerite. Initially, Marguerite was alarmed by the situation, but she soon seemed swayed by Legris's words. When Legris attempted to be intimate with her, Marguerite refused. As she tried to escape, she deliberately removed her shoes and, with a seemingly resistant but inwardly pleased demeanor, led Legris to the bedroom. Thus, Legris raped Marguerite, though he believed her resistance was only superficial and that they were both driven by mutual affection. Before leaving, Legris instructed Marguerite not to feel guilty or tell anyone, warning her that her husband would kill her if he found out. After parting from Marguerite, Legris sought confession from a priest, convinced that his actions were driven by love but also feeling he had betrayed his friend. as Carouges made the incident public. Count Pierre was pressured to investigate the case. According to Legris, he had not raped Marguerite. Their actions constituted an affair. The Count remarked that either way, people viewed such behavior as evil, making Legris's argument unnecessary. The Count assured Legris that he would protect him in court and that Legris needed only to firmly deny everything. The Count quickly held a public trial in Carouges's absence, declaring his confidant innocent and forbidding further discussion on the matter. As the Count prepared to report the trial's outcome to the king, news arrived that Carouges had already reached Paris and requested a duel with Legris. Legris, retaining a lower clerical status, was immune to secular court judgments. If he invoked clerical immunity, he could avoid punishment. However, Legris believed his honor had been damaged by Carouges and refused to seek the church's help. Ultimately, Legris attended the royal court, denying any assault on Marguerite and swearing an oath to that effect. Legris's account ended there, comparing his and Carouges's stories. Their descriptions of major events were similar, but many details differed. Both tried to portray themselves positively while discrediting their opponent. The film transitioned to Marguerite's perspective, emphasizing truth to suggest her version was the most accurate. The scene returned to Carouges and Marguerite's wedding, where Marguerite anticipated the most significant moment of her life. However, instead of loving looks from her husband or her father's blessings, she witnessed two men arguing over an estate. Carouges was furious about Robert's forced handover of the estate to the Count. After a tantrum, Carouges looked at Marguerite, stating he hoped she would fulfill her duty as a wife by bearing a male heir. Hearing this, Marguerite felt deeply saddened, perceiving her wedding as a business deal between Carouges and her father rather than a union of love. In the following days, Carouges constantly pressured Marguerite to conceive. In Carouges's narrative, he was a gentle and caring husband, but Marguerite only pretended to comply. The marriage brought her no genuine happiness. On the day Carouges and Legris met, the statement that the king's subjects should have no rift came from someone else, not Legris or Carouges. When Marguerite kissed Legris, she felt his overt forwardness but did not look at him with affectionate eyes, finding the gesture repulsive. At the banquet, while chatting with noble women, Marguerite learned that Legris was notorious for his flirtatious behavior. She admitted he was handsome but felt her husband didn't trust her. While dancing, Marguerite praised her husband for reconciling with Legris but subtly mocked Legris's narcissism. Despite Marguerite's polite smiles while talking to her husband, Legris narcissistically believed she was flirting with him, forming the basis of his version of events. Back at the estate, Marguerite and Carouges led a monotonous life. Despite years of marriage, they had no children, leading to frequent quarrels. Carouges prepared to leave for Scotland, instructing Marguerite to always have servants around and take good care of the estate. He believed the estate would struggle without him, but he underestimated Marguerite. Under Marguerite's excellent management, the estate thrived better than before, and she found personal fulfillment. However, because she hadn't conceived, Carouges's mother, Nicole, saw her as an unworthy wife. Despite all her contributions, Marguerite was deeply frustrated by this ongoing tension. Hearing about a famous Parisian tailor, she and her friend Marie went to have dresses made. While waiting, Marguerite saw Legris at the horse track. After exchanging greetings, she remarked that despite Legris's misconduct, he was undeniably handsome. When Carouges returned from Scotland, Marguerite dressed in fashionable clothes to surprise him. However, Carouges was furious, thinking her attire resembled that of a prostitute, and his mother agreed. In truth, this fashion was led by the queen herself. Before leaving for Paris and the Count's estate, Carouges instructed Marguerite to always have servants around and, for safety reasons, not to leave the house. One day, Carouges's mother suddenly needed to go out for an errand, taking all the servants with her and leaving Marguerite alone at home. Soon, Legris and his servant came to the door. Compared to Legris's own account, the process was largely the same, but the key difference was that Marguerite did not like Legris at all. Seeing this unwelcome guest about to assault her, Marguerite tried to escape. Her shoes came off in the struggle, not intentionally. Unfortunately, Marguerite was much weaker than Legris, and no matter how she struggled, she couldn't fend him off. Unwilling to suffer in silence, Marguerite finally decided to tell her husband. When Carouges heard about his wife's ordeal, his first reaction was to suspect that Marguerite had an affair with Legris, so he roughly grabbed her by the neck. After Marguerite explained for a long time, Carouges finally let go. Marguerite said she didn't want to stay silent after being violated and could only stand her ground in court with her husband's support. After thinking it over, Carouges decided to support his wife, but he soon forcefully demanded that she lie down on the bed, saying he wouldn't allow Legris to be the last one to possess her. Subsequently, Carouges asked his friends to help spread the word, but this quickly pushed Marguerite into the whirlwind of public opinion. Even her friend Marie no longer wanted to talk to her. Marie believed that Marguerite had previously commented on Legris's attractiveness, making her accusations seem baseless. Faced with her husband's series of decisions, Marguerite angrily thought it was too foolish. She merely wanted Legris to be tried in court, but Carouges' actions were complicating things further. However, Carouges didn't care about his wife's opinion. He just wanted to protect his own reputation. Soon, Nicole found Marguerite and told her that her struggle would only result in two outcomes: disgracing the family's name or putting Carouges' life at risk. Nicole added that she had a similar experience when she was young but chose to hide it to protect the family's honor. Nicole believed that this decision allowed her to survive. The perspective returned to the courtroom. It had been 6 months since Marguerite's assault. Ironically, after 5 years of marriage without children, Marguerite was now pregnant. Because Marguerite had once praised Legris's looks, officials thought this could indirectly prove her affair with Legris. Marguerite firmly denied this and couldn't understand why Marie had revealed this to the court. Officials then made a big deal about Marguerite's pregnancy, suggesting the child might be Legris's. They even publicly questioned whether her marital life with Carouges was harmonious. In the eyes of the public, Marguerite's dignity and reputation didn't matter. They were only interested in the dispute between the two men. No matter how the officials questioned her, Marguerite insisted she was telling the truth. The king finally approved the duel but told Marguerite that if Carouges lost, she would be burned at the stake for perjury. Hearing this, Marguerite broke down because Carouges had never mentioned this consequence to her, but there was no turning back, and Marguerite had to accept it. After the trial, Carouges angrily questioned his wife about why she praised Legris. Marguerite retorted, complaining that Carouges had deliberately hidden the severe consequences of losing the duel. Carouges claimed that God would not punish those who told the truth, which made Marguerite even angrier. Carouges was risking her life to save his own reputation. A few months later, Marguerite gave birth to a son. The night before the duel, Carouges visited his wife and saw their long-awaited son. Marguerite was deeply saddened, thinking it might be their last moment together. If she had known the consequences of telling the truth, Marguerite thought she might have made the same decision as many women before her. The next day, the duel between Carouges and Legris began, with the king and queen attending in person. All of Paris focused on the three people in the dueling ground. Before the fight, Carouges reaffirmed the duel's purpose to his wife, while Marguerite loudly proclaimed that she was telling the truth. Once ready, Carouges and Legris fiercely fought. Though they had once been close friends, they now fought to the death. After many rounds, neither could gain the upper hand with their lances. After both were nearly knocked off their horses simultaneously, they engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Legris used many dirty tricks and clearly had the upper hand. Seeing Carouges injured and down, Marguerite was plunged into despair. However, to the king, the spectacle was thrilling. He was more interested in the entertainment than in dispensing justice. After a bloody struggle, Carouges seized an opportunity to counterattack and won the duel, saving Marguerite's life. Carouges then approached the king to pay his respects. The king praised Carouges and ruled in his favor. After his speech, the king hinted that Carouges should quickly return to his wife. Carouges limped towards Marguerite, and they embraced. But Marguerite knew in her heart that her husband did it for himself. As Carouges rode out of Paris, he reveled in the crowd's cheers as a victor. However, it seemed people had forgotten that this trial stemmed from a woman's brave fight. Though the culprit was dead, no one cared about the scars in Marguerite's heart. Years later, Carouges died during the Crusades, and Marguerite managed the family estate alone. She enjoyed 30 years of wealth and never remarried. The film ends with The Last Duel, adapted from the novel by Eric Jaeger. Ben Affleck, who played the Count, and Matt Damon, who played Carouges, both contributed to the screenplay. Whether in narrative pace, scene control, or detail setting, the film was excellent. The Last Duel presents the same event from 3 different perspectives, similar to Rashomon, but with significant differences. The director used Marguerite's experience to condemn the injustices faced by medieval women, with a strong sense of contemporary relevance. The story is based on true historical events, with main characters whose names are accurately recorded. The case caused a great stir in France at the time, with thousands of people watching the duel. For centuries afterward, people continued to discuss the case's details enthusiastically. The duel between Carouges and Legris was the last officially sanctioned judicial duel in French history, though not the last honored duel, which was banned later. Marguerite's difficult situation in this duel is worth pondering in any era. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel. See you next time.